Think about it. Every single day, billions of us manage to get along. Mostly. We follow rules, we trust strangers we've never met, we work together on a mind-boggling scale. How? What's the invisible force that holds it all together? What's the social glue that keeps society from just collapsing?
I mean, it's a huge question, right? Is it just about laws and police forces, or is there something deeper, something inside all of us? Well, that's what we're going to dig into. We're going to unpack the very architecture of what holds us together, drawing on some really fascinating ideas to figure out what worked in the past and what might work in the future.
So a great place to start is this idea from economists Gary Anderson and Robert Tollison. They call it the moral constitution, and it's a brilliant way to think about it. It's like society's internal software. It's not the written laws, it's the unwritten rules we all just know. It's that little voice in your head that tells you, hey, don't cut in line, or don't swipe that thing, even when you know you could get away with it. That internal compass, it's absolutely crucial for making society work.
All right, so here's the game plan. First, we're going to look at one of the most powerful sources of social glue in history. Then, we'll see what happened when its monopoly got smashed. After that, we'll explore the modern, secular replacement, including its really dark side. And we'll wrap up by asking the big question: where do we find our social glue today?
Okay, let's dive in. For a huge chunk of human history, the main provider of that moral constitution, that social glue, was organized religion. And this brings up a really interesting economic puzzle. See, we're always told competition is great, right? It leads to better products, lower prices. But what if the product we're talking about is morality itself? Does competition still work?
So you've got two big ideas clashing here. On one side, you've got Adam Smith, the classic liberal thinker, basically saying, let 100 flowers bloom. Or, 100 churches. He thought competition would force them all to up their game to provide better moral services. But then you have Anderson and Tollison with this really provocative counter-argument. They say, hold on a second. When you have a bunch of religions all competing, all claiming to be the one true faith, it actually makes it easier to doubt all of them. They argue that a single monopoly church can provide a much more powerful and consistent social glue.
And they have this fantastic metaphor to explain it. Think of a society's belief in the divine, what they call religiosity, as a shared pasture. A commons. Now, if you have too many competing churches, it's like having way too many shepherds letting their sheep graze all over the place. What happens? The pasture gets stripped bare. It gets destroyed. But a monopolist, a single owner of that whole pasture, they have every reason in the world to protect it, to keep it healthy. And by doing that, they maintain a really strong moral framework for everyone.
So, the big question is, what happens when that monopoly gets shattered? Well, that brings us to one of the biggest market disruptions of all time, the Protestant Reformation. Now, we usually talk about this in religious terms, right? But if you put on your economist glasses and look at it, you see something incredible, a complete upheaval in the entire religious economy of Europe. For centuries, the Catholic Church was the undisputed king of the hill, the incumbent firm. And just like any good monopolist, it had a whole toolkit to keep its crown. It teamed up with governments to crush any dissent, what they called heresy. It did this thing called limit pricing, which is basically a massive flex. They built these gigantic, mind-blowingly expensive cathedrals that screamed to any potential rival, don't even think about it. You can't compete with this. And on top of all that, they ran the welfare system so people relied on them for everything, from saving their souls to filling their stomachs.
But you know how it goes with monopolies. They can get greedy. And this quote really hits the nail on the head. The church wasn't just selling salvation, it was playing the market. Through things like confession and selling indulgences, it was doing what economists call discriminatory pricing. What does that mean? It means the cost of being forgiven for your sins wasn't based on how bad the sin was. It was based on how much money you had. They were squeezing every last penny out of their customers. And that, right there, created a huge, gaping hole in the market for a competitor to jump into.
And who jumped into that hole? The reformers. Think of Martin Luther, John Calvin, and the rest as startup founders. They were new firms crashing the market. They had a lean, streamlined product, salvation through faith alone. The price? Way lower. No need for costly middlemen. They were a disruptive technology that threatened the entire business model of the old monopoly.
So, who were the early adopters of this new product? Well, the data's pretty clear. When you look at the Holy Roman Empire, it wasn't just random. The cities that jumped on the Protestant bandwagon, as you can see, were the heavy hitters, the independent, commercially powerful cities. These were the places that had the most to gain, both in terms of money and political power, by breaking free from the old monopoly.
Okay, so the old religious monopoly is shattered.
But that creates a brand new problem. You've got these modern nation-states starting to pop up, full of all kinds of different people. They desperately need a new kind of social glue, something that doesn't depend on one single church. So, the question becomes, what on earth is going to hold these new, complicated societies together? And for this, we turn to the legendary sociologist Emil Durkheim, who came up with a perfect term: civil religion. It's basically a secular faith. It's a shared belief not in a god, but in the nation itself, in its ideals, its stories, its symbols. You know what I'm talking about, the feeling people get when they see their flag or sing the national anthem. That shared belief in things like liberty, equality, fraternity. That becomes the new glue, the new moral bedrock. And this was the #1 challenge for nation builders in the 19th century. I mean, take France, for example. You had a country full of people who didn't think of themselves as French first. They were Bretons or Occitans or Alsatians. They spoke totally different dialects. So the massive question was, how do you take all these different groups and make them feel like they're all part of one thing, one nation? How do you forge a single people? Well, the French Third Republic came up with a pretty powerful formula. Step 1, create a national school system. Make it free, make it mandatory, and, this is key, make it secular. This was going to be the factory for the new civil religion. Step 2, mandate that French, and only French, was the language spoken in those schools. And step 3, through this whole process, they deliberately created a single, unified French identity, basically writing over all those old local loyalties and languages. A shared language became the software for a shared soul.
But here's the twist. This new, incredibly powerful social glue, it had a terrifying dark side. Because the same force, this national solidarity that could unite millions of people inside a country, could also be aimed outward. And that led to conflict on a scale the world had literally never seen before.
And the change is just staggering when you look at the history of warfare. Take ancient battles, like between the Greek city-states. Yeah, they were brutal, for sure, but they were limited. The entire Peloponnesian War, which lasted 27 years, cost Athens about 18,000 lives. Now, compare that to World War I. This was a whole new beast, total war. This isn't just armies fighting other armies anymore. This is entire nations, whipped into a frenzy by nationalism, throwing everything they have at each other. The casualties aren't counted in the thousands, they're counted in the millions. And total war has these really horrifying characteristics. Suddenly, the factory worker making shells is just as much a part of the war as the soldier on the front line. The line between civilian and combatant just evaporates. The power of the government explodes, it takes over the economy, all of social life. And the war itself turns into this ideological crusade. It's our way of life versus their way of life, with no room for compromise. And maybe the most chilling part, when you've sacrificed millions of lives, it creates this awful logic that says the only way to honor that sacrifice is with total, absolute victory. Anything less would make it all for nothing. So here's the bottom line. The very same social glue that holds a nation together can become the gasoline for its rage. That powerful feeling of us that creates unity at home can be weaponized to demonize them and justify violence on a scale that was once just unimaginable. Solidarity, it turns out, is a very, very dark side. And that brings us right up to the present day. The era of total war between major powers seems to be over, thankfully. But that question of social glue, it's more urgent now than maybe ever before. In our globalized, hyper-connected, and let's face it, pretty divided world, what's holding us together now?
A huge challenge we're facing today is fragmentation. Just look at the debate over how to protect traditional knowledge. You know, things like indigenous farming techniques or medicinal plants. You've got the World Trade Organization looking at it as a trade problem. The World Intellectual Property Organization sees it as, well, an IP problem. The Convention on Biological Diversity thinks it's about conservation. They're all circling the same issue, but they're stuck in their own little boxes, their own silos. There's no unified way of looking at it. There's no shared glue.
So our big global institutions might be all fragmented, but that deep human need for connection, that hasn't gone anywhere. And this brings us right back to Durkheim and this amazing idea he had called collective effervescence. You know that feeling. It's that electric energy you get in a huge crowd. It's the buzz in a sports stadium, the unified feeling at a concert, or that sense of shared purpose at a protest. It's that moment where I becomes we, and you feel like you're part of something way bigger than yourself. And even in our super fragmented, digital-first world, we still go looking for these moments. We crave these real-world, collective experiences where our individual selves kind of melt away and we become part of a group. It's a powerful reminder that this need we have for solidarity, for belonging to a tribe, it's not going anywhere. It's baked right into our DNA.
And that brings us full circle. We're back to our original question, but now it feels a lot more urgent, doesn't it? We've seen how religious monopolies acted as social glue. We've seen how the nation-state took over that role. And we've seen the incredible power and the terrifying danger of both. So the question for all of us, for our time, is what's next? In a world where old bonds are fraying and new divides seem to pop up every day, where on earth are we going to find the social glue that holds us all together?